In early 1764, after France lost the Seven Years' War, Pierre Laudasse and his stepson Augustin Chateau founded what was to become the city of St. Louis. They named the city after King Louis IX of France. The region in which the city stands was part of Spanish Louisiana from 1762 until 1802. After the Louisiana Purchase, it became a major port on the Mississippi River. The steamboat industry allowed St. Louis to serve as a staging point for the Lewis and Clark expedition and railroad construction. For most of the 19th century and part of the early 20th century, trade on the Mississippi River was dominated by paddle wheel steamboats. Their use generated rapid development of the economies of the port cities along the rivers. It also helped with logistics of agricultural goods and commodity products produced by farmers. This made it a more efficient form of transportation to the markets, which provided prosperity along the major river. However, the expanding steamboat traffic did have a severe environmental impact, especially in the middle Mississippi Valley between St. Louis and Ohio. By 1850, river traffic had increased so much to an extent that St. Louis had become the second largest port in the country, with commercial cargo exceeding only by that of New York City. It had also grown to be the largest city in the nation west of Pittsburgh. Not only did St. Louis grow as a river city on the Mississippi, but the city became the gateway to the west after gold had been discovered in California the prior year. Furthermore, the advent of the railroad in the early 1850s, St. Louis's population grew to almost 80,000 people. The first westward bound train left St. Louis in 1855, which eventually led to the demise of the riverboat traffic within the city. As the population increased, so did the city of St. Louis. Further advancements in technology fueled the development beyond traditional steamboats. The discovery of gold in California in 1848 ignited the American people to construct a more rapid and dependable transportation system in the West. Missouri and the West needed railroads, and the people of St. Louis visualized a railroad all the way to the Pacific Ocean, with that railroad starting from their city. Leadership within St. Louis secured a Missouri charter in 1849 for the Pacific Railroad to extend from St. Louis to the western boundary of Missouri and to the Pacific Ocean. Around 1873, George J. Gould became interested in Western railroads when he acquired a large block of stock in the Union Pacific Railroad. Gould purchased control of the Kansas Pacific, the Denver Pacific, and the Central Pacific. He noted the westward expansion policy of the new Missouri Pacific Railway as a threat to his Union Pacific. In 1879, he bought the controlling interest in the company, becoming its president. When the Civil War began, St. Louis, which had grown to more than 160,000 people, became a divided city, where abolitionists shared the streets with slaveholders. While Missouri was primarily in favor of slavery, the state pledged itself to the Union, creating much conflict among its citizens. Yet within the city divided over the war itself had a devastating effect on the economy and local businesses, which ultimately slowed the development of the city furthermore, eventually causing it to lose ground to Chicago in its race to become the leading city of the Midwest. The period between 1865 and 1900 was marked by major expansion as more and more people fled from the devastated South after the Civil War. As a result, St. Louis soon became a major industrial center in the United States, and in the 1880s, with more than 6,148 factories, became home to many leading industries. Also during the 1880s, the city's population grew by 29%, from 350,000 plus to 450,000 plus, making it the country's fourth largest city after New York, Philadelphia, and Chicago. Moreover, this period saw great improvements in rapid infrastructure, transportation, and development. During this time, the city encountered major public park system expansion, public transit changes, major commercial and residential activity, and the redevelopment of the downtown. Most notably, buildings to come out of the redevelopment of the downtown were the Wainwright Building, St. Louis's first skyscraper, and Union Station, once one of the world's largest and busiest train stations. In 1904, St. Louis hosted the World's Fair to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 1804 Louisiana Purchase. The World's Fair was one of the greatest events in history and trumped St. Louis's fourth city status to the rest of the world. In conjuncture to the World's Fair, the 1904 Summer Olympics were held that same summer, which allowed for the United States to become the first English-speaking country to host the Olympic Games. Furthermore, the fair and the Olympic Games attracted more than 20 million visitors and bolstered the city of St. Louis to become one of the world's largest producers of beer, shoes, stoves, wagons, and many other products, which in turn brought the city of St. Louis to the world stage. Through the early 20th century following the World's Fair, St. Louis continued to industrialize. Increasing popularity of the automobile caused congestion in the downtown area as early as the 1920s. Ironically, St. Louis was home to the nation's first gasoline station and the first automobile accident. Women of St. Louis, Gateway to the West. In addition to the changing racial and ethnic experiences, women also experienced an interesting life in St. Louis. As St. Louis grew into an urban hub, the rights and lifestyles of women throughout the late 19th and early 20th century also began to shift. Being hailed as a new gateway to the West, thousands of families seeking opportunity settled into St. Louis in the 1830s. Incidentally, the lives of women and the roles that they played in the city saw significant changes due to this move. Migration to St. Louis for several migrant populations created cultural and ethnic divisions amongst German, Irish, Catholic, and Protestant families. As a result of this, women created their own social services and charity organizations based in their particular cultural groups. Women in the early city took the responsibility of expanding religious flocks in their churches, providing aid for disabled women, and volunteering to help other women with children. In addition, many women, under the guide of their churches, opened orphanages, hospitals, and widows' homes to support local communities. Organizations such as the Sisters of Mercy played an important role in providing social services during mass migrations in the 1830s and 40s. Industrialization soon swept over St. Louis, boosting the workforce and industry in areas such as brewing, flour milling, slaughtering, machining, and tobacco processing. Along with new work for men, Women worked in sewing factories and sometimes on the railroad. Unfortunately, because women were still viewed as second-class citizens during this time period, they were typically paid much less than male workers. In addition to the growth of unskilled labor for women, the growth of St. Louis as a city provided some women the clientele to pursue alternative, illegal forms of work. In the mid-1880s, population of men nearly doubled, of women, and thus the growth of brothels, streetwalkers, and prostitution arose. The industrial era introduced even more driven and inspirational women in St. Louis. Susan Blow, for example, was responsible for establishing the first kindergarten in the United States in 1873. She taught children in the morning and teachers in the afternoon without pay for 11 years. By 1883, every school in St. Louis had a kindergarten, which eventually would stand as a model for the rest of the nation to adopt. Because women as a whole were a disenfranchised group in St. Louis, the history of African American women and women of color are difficult to highlight due to the long-standing history of racism in the state. The African American population, and especially the African American women, received little to no rights during these years. It is important to note, however, the key female African American figures during this time period, such as Josephine Baker. Miss Baker not only was a revolutionary woman, defying gender norms by oftentimes performing in the nude, she was also a vocal civil rights activist throughout her career as a singer and dancer, refusing to perform for segregated audiences and forcing integration during her sets. The efforts of women in St. Louis were diverse and powerful, initially concerning themselves with the betterment of their communities. Women in St. Louis eventually were able to establish themselves as forces to be reckoned with through their organizational skills and political and social triumphs. In the 1920s, there would be a major public works overhaul of the city of St. Louis. These would include a new courthouse, war memorial, and auditorium. Many of the municipal buildings were old and outdated to modern standards at the time. In addition, in the 1920s, the United States would place a ban on alcohol consumption, also known as Prohibition. Prohibition would provide a huge blow to St. Louis's brewing industry, putting many out of work and unemployed. This period of time will be known as the Dry, Weary Years. However, this would not put a damper on the spirit of St. Louis, as a young mail carrier by the name of Charles Lindbergh, funded by St. Louis businessmen, would be the first man to cross the Atlantic non-stop in a single flight.